Τι είναι αυτό?
Ένα σπουργίτη.
Τι είναι αυτό?
Μόλις τώρα στο είπα, πατέρα, σπουργίτη είναι.
Τι είναι αυτό?
Ένα σπουργίτη είναι, πατέρα. Ένα σπουργίτη. Σπου-γι-τι!
Τι είναι αυτό?
Γιατί το κάνεις αυτό το πράγμα, μπορείς να μου πεις? Τόσες φορές σου είπα, είναι ένα σπουργίτη! Δεν το καταλαβαίνεις! Πού πας?
Δυνατά.
Σήμερα ο μικρός μου γιος που πριν λίγες μέρες έκλεισε τα 3 καθόταν μαζί μου έξω στο πάρκο όταν ένα σπουργίτη ήρθε και κάθισε απέναντί μας. Ο γιος μου με ρώτησε 21 φορές τι ήταν αυτό και του απάντησα και τις 21 φορές ότι ήταν ένα σπουργίτη. Τον αγκάλιασα τρυφερά και τις 21 φορές που μου έκανε την ίδια ερώτηση, ξανά και ξανά, χωρίς να εκνευριστώ, νιώθοντας στοργή για το αθώο μου αγοράκι.
The scriptures say to us that as a father pitieth his children, so the Lord pitieth them that fear him. And we're told in the scripture that the eternal God is our refuge, and underneath are his everlasting arms. As we gather to pay tribute to the memory and the life of Jim, where we celebrate the fact that Jesus is risen from the dead, and because he is risen, so shall Jim and so shall we, through the gift of grace and mercy and love of Jesus our Lord. We're going to sing together hymn number 504, The Old Rugged Cross, very familiar hymn and song that meant a lot to Jim, and we want to sing it with happiness and joy and confidence. So let us stand as we sing together.
On a hill far away
that old cross that you suffered and died to purchase and sanctify me. So I cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it one day for a crown. To the old rugged cross I will ever be true, its shame and reproach gladly bear. Then he'll call me someday to my home far away, when his glory I'll share. So I'll cling to the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown. Thank you. You may be seated. One of the things that I appreciate about a service like this is when the family participates. And Jim and Pat had twin granddaughters, and they'll come and they're going to lead us in this part of the service. And I really appreciate their willingness to do that.
Hello, my name is Carrie, and I'm one of DJ's granddaughters. I'll be reading the New Testament reading from John 16. Truly, truly, I say to you,
you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice. You'll be sorrowful, but your sorrow will turn into joy. When a woman is giving birth, she has sorrow because her hour has come. But when she has delivered the baby, she no longer remembers the anguish for joy that a human being has been born into the world. So also you have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you. In that day you will ask nothing of me. Truly, truly, I say to you, whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he will give it to you. Until now you have asked nothing in my name. Ask and you will receive, that your joy may be full. Now please stand as we recite the Lord's Prayer together. Thank you. Of course. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Proverbs chapter 23, verses 22 to 25. Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Buy truth and do not sell it. Buy wisdom, instruction, and understanding. The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice. He who fathers a wise son will be glad in him. Let your father and mother be glad. Let her who bore you rejoice. Thank you.
Now, Scott and Andy, if you'll come and share with us, we would appreciate that. want to stand with you or just sit? Okay.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming this afternoon. It's nice to see so many old friends again. Despite his immense fame, Dean Martin, born Dino Paul Crocetti in Steubenville, Ohio, remained an enigma even to those closest to him. Jean Martin, his second wife, said of him in a 1978 interview, "When I met Dean Martin, it was love at first sight. I married him knowing nothing about him. I divorced him 23 years later, and I still know nothing about him." Several years ago, I was watching my mom and dad to determine how and why they related so well, having been married for 69 years. They were pretty fun to watch, as they typically acted in supporting roles by constant back and forth, playful banter. Dad shuffling around the house, and Mama unsuccessfully directing his every move. I remember asking her at that time, "After all you've been through together, do you still love Dad?" She replied without a hesitation, "I'd cut my right arm off for him." I've learned from them that love is a commitment and not a feeling. You're not in love if you're married for very long. You make a decision to love, and like an old tree, you may not see the fruit until it has time to mature. The book of Matthew says never to refer to someone as Father, but your Father in heaven. I'm so glad it doesn't say call no man dad. Many a man can father a child, but it takes a real man to be a dad. No man is indispensable, but some are irreplaceable. Often they teach you how to fail and how to make mistakes or poor choices. It's only when you get older that you realize how truly human they are. When your dad dies, it doesn't matter that other people's dads have died or that dads have been dying since the first son was born. What matters in the moment of his death is that he was your dad, your one and only. Your loss is unique, profound, yours alone. And everyone, if they live a long life, has a story to tell. Ernest Hemingway once said, "Any man's life, truly told, is a novel." I've learned that if we don't get the chance to tell our story, perhaps our friends and family will. Dad recently said that the hardest part of loving someone in life is saying goodbye to them. Cooter Pollard, Dad's closest childhood friend, had a dad named Jim Pollard, whom Dad idolized. He played mandolin and was in the fertilizer and wire-bound box business. Mr. Pollard traveled around Central Florida in the 1940s to orange groves and produce fields that had unspoiled, clear-bottom lakes. He would get permission to fish with his son, so Dad and Cooter would jump at the chance to fish in Groveland, Mascot, Tavares, and Lake Kissimmee, where they caught bass and other freshwater fish. Cooter and Dad would sometimes camp out, or if it was just a day trip, and when Mr. Pollard had had a few too many cocktails, he would insist that Dad, still a very young, unlicensed teenager, should drive them back to Lakeland. One childhood friend, Buddy Bradley, had a dad who was a train engineer, and when Dad was 8 to 9 years old, my grandmother would put Dad on the train from Lakeland to downtown Tampa, where he knew to board streetcars out to Ballast Point, where he and Buddy would spend the day fishing. At the end of the day, they'd board Dad on the train alone, and he'd return to Lakeland with just enough fresh fish for dinner. And there were other young boys' activities, such as catching turtles in Lake Morton, small grass turtles. Dad and Cooter would swim along just with their eyes at the waterline, hand catch them, and sell them just enough to get just enough money to fill their pockets with candy. Cooter and Dad would get up at 5 a.m. and go down to Lake Hunter to fish for bass. On the eve of yet another grand expedition, Grandpa wouldn't let Dad go fishing the next morning until the yard was mowed. Luckily, Cooter had his dad's Coleman lantern, and they mowed the grass at night twice until it passed Grandpa's approval. When he was in his teens, he was supposed to be at a movie with his childhood friend Harrison Barnes, but decided that since the wind was up, he'd go sailing on Lake Hollingsworth. His mother, Elsie, had made him a sail out of a bed sheet, and he was eager to try it out. The wind was blowing stronger than he had anticipated, and the jib cleat jammed, causing the boat to capsize. The mast quickly stuck in the famous Lake Hollywood muck, and he decided to take his jeans and shoes off and swim ashore. Dad had noticed that a large crowd had formed at Florida Southern College, and his teenage curiosity made him swim over to see what was causing all the commotion. He swam towards two women near the lake's edge, and as he approached them, they explained they had gathered to look for a drowned boy. They asked if he was the boy the fire department was searching for. He said that indeed, he supposed he was. So they took him over to the crowd, who began taking pictures of the boy in his underwear. Once he was with Cooter when they were duck hunting near the Glendale water treatment plant, affectionately known by Dad as the Sewer Breeze Acres, when Cooter shot a duck that immediately fell in the large sewage settling pond. Cooter, not wanting to waste a perfectly good duck, promptly swam out to retrieve. Luckily, Dad knew where to draw the line. His pet names were legendary. He called me Buckshot, and his grandson Callahan Birdshot. His oldest granddaughter Claire was known as Doodle. Don Coleman was either Coal Person, or because of Don's well-known thriftiness, Coupon Don. Bill Chase, because of his disdain for warm beer, was affectionately labeled Cold Beer Billy. Bill McKee was his favorite joke teller, and he referred to him as McGee. Dad's brother, Bob, was Uncle Boob, and Cooter was his favorite childhood friends. His nickname morphed over the years from Jim to J. Fore, and then Daddy Jim, or DJ for short, and finally, Deej. It is said that mothers make boys and dads make men. The Irish also say when a dad dies, he takes your childhood with him. And what a childhood we had, an amazing dad, a fun dad, an ever-present third grader who was always willing to take that next adventure, always interested in you and showing you the world. I don't believe I ever heard my dad brag about himself, and when he quietly entered the room, everyone wanted to say hello. He remembered your name, your family members' names, dates, places, things he knew that would be important to you. To his friends, Dad loved you. He truly did. He was a constant optimist, and the only thing I ever heard my father say with a negative tone was that his friends were passing away, and it made him sad. How many of you felt like you were the only person in the room when Dad spoke? When asked which of the laws was most important, Christ said, "You shall love God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind." That is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like unto it, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." My dad knew his neighbors, and they knew him. He cared, he shared, and he loved. When your dad dies, say the Irish, you lose your umbrella against bad weather. But I was one of the lucky ones. Breakfast every Friday. I spoke with him at least 2 or 3 times a week, every week, for the last 20 years of his life. It was important to him and to me. And no matter where I was, with every weather event, I knew I'd get the call. How strong was the wind? From which direction was it blowing? How many inches of rain? And what did the tide do? A dad is a man who expects his son to be as good a man as he meant to be. There are questions that only a son will ask of a dad, and answers that only a dad may give if a son is ever to believe the truth. And sons depend on their dads for this truth when they can find it nowhere else. Rather than be true to his generation of suck it up, don't complain, take it like a man, he'd prefer to say, let's talk about weather, football, hunting and fishing, nothing philosophical or of any deep meaning, just light and easygoing, common ground. And I was also lucky because he told me he loved me after every phone call and every time we were together, and that he was proud of me. He did not have an easy childhood. Very few of you knew that. It was very difficult. His father was an unreasonably stern man who could never be pleased with anything my dad had done. I believe that is why he was so patient with his children and why he rarely judged you. It seems strange that he isn't here. I guess it's because he was really never absent. He was always close by, always available, always present, always interested in us. His use of words and phrases were unique. Do I hear an amen? And were meant to be self-effacing and humorous. His achievements, though admirable, were nothing extraordinary, but his presence and good-natured ribbing always was. Bada bing, bada boom, chicken one day, feathers the next. There were the usual worldly things like sports, in particular college football. Usually around October, Mom would say, "Well, I guess I'll see your dad in January." And then cars. Some people like cars. My dad loved cars. I've always thought car dealers should fly flags at half-mast when my father passed. And boats. If it floated, he was anxious to go aboard. Dad had adventures courtesy of the United States Navy and Shell Oil Company, but his most memorable were always in Florida waters. From Steinhatchee to Boca Grande to the Florida Everglades and Keys, around to the Bahamas, and finally Jupiter, so many adventures. And it was due to the boats that he taught us about sunsets. Dad made sure our lives had everything to do with water, on, in, or under, his insatiable desire to be around water. He loved it so very much. Always the first in for fishing, scalloping, and lobstering, and usually the last out with the most plunder. But sunsets and weather were always something he insisted we take time to study. Each event was unique to him, and each allowed him, I would think, time to reflect on the life and knowledge and acknowledge the sovereignty and majesty of his Creator. Dad never authored a book, but he read an entire novel every week. He had an extraordinary vocabulary. He was a voracious reader, and crossword puzzles were a joy. I've never known anyone other than his mother, Elsie, who read more books or finished more crossword puzzles than my dad. To say that he was organized was an understatement. The Navy left an indelible impression on my dad. Because of his time on the aircraft carriers, the USS Midway, the Coral Sea, and Randolph, ship shape was not an expression, it was a lifestyle. Having spent, in his words, 3 years, 11 months, 29 days, and 23 seconds serving our country, he said the last thing he did in the Navy was play mumbly peg with his good friend Harmon Jones. We all know that Scripture says pride goes before the fall. But did you also know in Proverbs that humility comes before honor? I was there on multiple occasions when my dad did the honorable thing for others rather than what was profitable for himself. It mattered that he was just and fair. So many people have come forward to remember how he influenced their lives. Mark Twain said that the human race only has one effective weapon, and that is laughter. Fridays just won't be the same, Dad. You taught me so much in life. What I've learned from my dad is that we all make mistakes. We all blow it from time to time. But in those rare moments when everything is right and the universe seems true, I know my dad was proud of his family and the friends he had in his life. And finally, I shall miss his generation. He has gone home to be with the Father. His homecoming will be celebrated with those who loved him and have gone on before, and his heart will be remembered by those who remain. Dad taught us that each of us are allocated only so many sunsets, but the amount of laughter is up to us. Dad, you taught us all how to laugh, and we all laughed with you. So here's to you, my mentor, my teacher, my friend. I love you, and I always will. With all of your foibles, misgivings, and mistakes, you are the most honorable man I've ever known. With rue, my heart is laden, for golden friends I had, for many a rose-lipped maiden and many a light-foot lad. By brooks too broad for leaping, the light-foot boys are laid. The rose-lipped girls are sleeping in fields where roses fade. May the Lord bless you and keep you, Dad. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Farewell.
Amen. Thank you.
I'd like, Scott, want to thank you all for coming here today. It means a great deal to our family, and especially to our mother. This is hard. This is real hard. I speak publicly often, but I've got a giant hole in my heart right now, which makes it really difficult. But like all holes in Florida, when you dig a hole, it fills in with water. So what's filling my hole right now is all the things my dad did, all his little sayings. He had his own vocabulary. But he was a very unique man. I learned maybe not until the 20s, in my 20s, that my father was part of a fraternity of men, and there was a sorority of sisters that were part of that. It was a club. He was part of a club. and he took us on amazing trips. The things he did with us are unbelievable. He was, as Scott said, he brought up Mark Twain. I think he was a Mark Twain novel himself. He was part Huckleberry Finn and part Tom Sawyer. He was Huckleberry Finn in that he built rafts and went down the Mississippi, that kind of thing. He was always seeking adventure. We would do unbelievable things like pack a boat up with tents and cookware and food, and with a fraternity of fathers and sons, we'd go on trips where we'd cross different parts of Florida, camp out, and cook for 3 or 4 days. And as a child, being shown how to do that, it was just amazing. It was just an amazing life. He did trips to the Bahamas. We would go, the first time I ever went to the Bahamas with him, we were in an 18-foot boat with a single engine that he had just bought. I would think that would be insane today to do something like that. But he had no fear. He didn't look at it as a fearful, scary thing to do. He looked at it as another adventure, a Huckleberry Finn adventure. And we did things like, he bought a boat in New Jersey, and we brought the boat down from New Jersey, slept in a different state every night. Just crazy fun. But he had this luck of the Irish with him. On the way down, we ran over a submerged log, and it bent the prop toward a shaft up, and a shaft is a very difficult thing to fix, but we did it right in front of a facility that could straighten a shaft. He had another boat, a Stamus, that they had not put the fuel intake all the way down to the bottom of the tank, and we took it through Lake Okeechobee from Boca Grande. We were on the way to the Bahamas. We ran out of gas, not because he didn't plan correctly, because he, like Scott said, he's an immaculate planner. It was a boat hardware problem. Once again, we ran aground, and once again, we bent a shaft. Once again, it happened right in front of a facility that could straighten the shaft out. Unbelievable. Coming back from the Bahamas one time, the weather was so bad, I thought I was literally going to die. I thought this was a wrap for us. We all had masks on. We had to put masks on to navigate. Not a problem. And he had a smile on his face, just calming along, just not afraid. But unlike Huckleberry Finn, who was kind of marginalized in society, kind of a loner, Dad was kind of like Tom Sawyer, where everybody around town knew him and loved him. Everywhere we went, people would say, "Hello, Jim." I don't know as many people that would say that. He was always being said, "Hello, Jim," no matter where we went. And I think it was because of how he treated people. He knew how to take time and meet people and respect people. And I think he respected everybody that he ever met. It didn't matter what your profession was. You could be a corporate CEO, or you could be the guy that put the stripes in the parking lot. Didn't matter to him. He just enjoyed people, and he enjoyed being around people. But unlike Tom Sawyer, who got people to do work for him, like paint the fence, Dad never did that. He never leaned on people. He was always there for people to lean on him. He was always willing to do something for somebody. And his word was his bond. If he said he was going to do something, he did it. He never welched. He never complained, as Scott said. If he did a business deal and if both people couldn't come out exactly equal, he made sure the other person came out a little ahead. He did not know how to take advantage of people. He was a very good soul in that regard. And I can't say enough about the type of man he was, and showing us how to live and showing us what's important in life. And I often forget it, and I have to be reminded of it. He lived life. He really lived life. He did more fun things than anybody I've ever known. I got my first passport when I was 12 years old. He took me to Mexico to go duck hunting at 12. We dove hunted all throughout the fields of Polk County, and we dove hunted in Mexico as well. We shot duck all over the place, Texas, Louisiana, throughout Florida back when we had duck. We went pheasant hunting. We did amazing things, and that's the hunting aspect of it. We fished with them everywhere. That man, the last few months of his life, we sat and discussed how many times he think he might have casted. That's the act of doing this. He was always casting. And we estimated he might have cast as many as 500,000 times. 500,000 times this man did this. And he was exceptionally good at it. He could pick a spot up against the shore and put his lure right there and cast and jig, cast and pull. And while Scott and I were tired sitting on the boat, he never stopped. From 6:30 in the morning till 6:30 at night, he casted. He fished. He loved it. He loved fishing. He loved hunting. He loved being with us. He wasn't the type of person that would sit and go, okay, here's how you do a certain thing. He wasn't that type of teacher. He was the type of teacher that did stuff, and we watched him. And he did stuff consistently, and we were able to learn by watching him. And he taught us both how to be good hunters and fishermen, and how to drive boats, how to navigate to foreign countries in your boat. He was an amazing teacher, an amazing man, and I don't know how I'm going to fill my heart. I'm just going to have to lean on my friends and family and get through this somehow. We've amassed a good pile of good friends and family, so we're going to be leaning on each other. And once again, I want to thank you all very much for coming and help us lean on you right now. And please let us know how we can help you back in the future. Thank you for being here today.
There are two special friends that are to come now, and I'm sorry. Grandson Callahan, and thank you, Callahan. I watched this young man grow up in this church and used to pick on him. Now he's bigger than I am, so I've learned to be very nice to him. Bless you, brother.
Thank you guys for being here. We're here today to remember the life and legacy DJ leaves on this earth. I was his only grandson. I'd like to speak from that special perspective for a minute. He loved all of his grandchildren equally, but I really did share a special bond with him. He'd call me my pal Cal, and his face would light up every time I'd see him. Just like Andy just said, my dad, he taught me a lot of things too. He taught me how to fish, tie knots, how to drive boats, how to sail. He knew everything there was to know about fishing lures. He pretty much knew everything about everything. I've never, like Andy just said that, but man, it was an ocean of knowledge in that man. I don't know how he did that. You'd walk into his garage when I was a little kid, and it was like you're walking into a Bass Pro Shop. My family can speak to that as well. I've never seen so many tackle boxes, rod and reels, fishing hats, sunglasses, boat shoes. I mean, he had everything. And as a little kid, just looking at it, it was spectacular. He was always ready to go out on the water at a moment's notice. Every day he wanted to be out on the water. That's where he felt the most happy. That's where he felt the most calm. It brought him so much joy to be out there. And he was ready for an adventure at any time, but not during football season. If the Florida Gators were playing, he'd be in his favorite chair with his feet propped up, a jar of peanuts, and a cold toddy, and I'd be 3, 4 years old sitting on his lap, just watching the game. And that was one of the best memories I have with him. And now that I think about it, he was the coolest man I've ever met, and not much bothered him. He was just DJ. Easy does it, just no stress about anything. And I believe that's why he lived so long, is because he just lived a life of zero stress. And I think we can all learn a lesson from that. He figured that a long time ago. He was a family man first, that's for sure. He loved being with his family. He always made sure that his wife, his children, and his grandchildren were happy and taken care of all the time. That was the ultimate goal for him, to do that. There was so much love in this man. He also cared so much for his friends and their families as well. He made sure that you felt seen, that you were heard. He made sure that you knew that you mattered. Not a lot of people do that nowadays. He was always thinking about other people. And now that I come to think about it, they just don't make men like that anymore. All right? They just don't. Our time together on this earth is so short. I thank God that I had him as a grandfather for as long as I did. He was my dear friend, and I will cherish the beautiful memories I share with him for the rest of my life. I'd like to finish with a little short preface that I read a long time ago that really spoke to me. You may have heard of it. In the time of your life, live. Seek goodness everywhere, and when it is found, bring it out of its hiding place, and let it be free and unashamed. Discover in all things that which shines and is beyond corruption. Encourage virtue in whatever heart it may have been driven into secrecy and sorrow by the shame and terror of the world. Ignore the obvious, for it is unworthy of the clear eye and the kindly heart. Be the inferior of no man, nor of any man be the superior. Remember that every man is the variation of yourself. No man's guilt is not yours, nor is any man's innocence a thing apart. Have no shame in being kindly and gentle. In the time of your life, live, so that in that wondrous time you shall not add to the misery and sorrow of the world, but should smile to the infinite delight and mystery of it. I love you, Deej. Thank you.
Now there are two friends that will share, Don Coleman and Dr. McKee.
Konnichiwa. I greet you as Jim and I would do so much in Japanese. Whether it was in the morning, Ohayo gozaimashita, or in the evening, Kubawa. We both had served in the Navy in the South China Sea and around Japan, and we had developed a keen interest in things of the Far East. Jim loved country, served it well. His sense of duty to friends, his devotion to family, great sense of humor and quick wit you've heard about today. But I hope to share a few stories that will tweak your memory. And this first, I guess about 60 years ago, I came to Lakeland, and Jim took me under his wing. He introduced me around town, and he introduced me to duck hunting, Kissimmee River, and snook fishing in the Everglades. After a great duck hunt in the morning, and it was more than just duck hunting, we would sit around the campfire and talk and tell war stories. One of my favorite memories is when we were sitting around with Jim and Bob, his brother, and Ralph and Jumbo Allen, and Cooter and Tommy Pollard and Edwards brothers. Jack Harper and I were sitting around, and we decided that we needed to form a Ducks Unlimited chapter in Polk County. And of course, we all elected Cooter Pollard as the first chairman. He went on to serve nationally also. Anyway, after a while, we would go to different places on the island in Kissimmee, and Cooter and Jim had introduced us to Mr. Leipzig, who had owned Brahma Island. And one morning, Bob Fagan and I were coming back from the north end of Brahma from the duck blind, and we were attacked by a wild hog. And Bob says, I'm going to shoot that hog, it's rabid. And he did. And about that time, up rode Mr. Leipzig on his horse. He got off his horse and he said, what's going on, fellas? And Bob said, I just saved your hog herd. I killed a rabid hog. Mr. Leipzig walked over to the hog, pulled up his ear. He said, that hog's not rabid. He just had a tick behind his ear. That'll be $100, boys. We got back to camp. I said, Bob, what are we going to do with this hog? And Fore said, don't worry, boys. Now we got supper. I don't know who ended up dressing and cleaning it. It wasn't me. Jim knew the Everglades like the back of his hand. He even could navigate at night and before they had markers. And one of my favorite hunting trips is when we were trolling Gopher Creek, trolling Cabbage Bay, and we caught 8 snook in a row. For me, that was a record. Of course, he caught 5 and I caught 3. He was always that way. He always outfished me. So we got back to the camp and Jim said, don't tell them we were trolling. It's tantamount to cheating. We were supposed to be plugging and casting, as they said earlier today. Well, anyway, we had some great trips together. One fishing trip, we were in Gopher Creek. Ralph Blaylock, Jim Fore, and I, and Scott were on their boat, and Bob Fagan was on the boat with me, and we ran aground next to a hornet's nest. Well, Ralph immediately jumped in the water to save us. I threw my rod in the water. Jim and Scott came up and helped us out, and then Scott said, hey, you guys got anything to eat? My dad didn't bring anything but sardines. And we said, yeah, we got some Vienna sausage. He said, I guess I won't eat today. But anyway, we, after many years of hunting and fishing there in the Glades and Kissimmee, we decided to go elsewhere. And one of our favorite places was Montana. We were on the Bighorn River, right in the middle of the Crow Reservation. And we had some great times out there. When we got a little older, we decided not to travel quite so far, so we settled on duck hunting at Bob Fagan's and bird hunting at Bob Fagan's up in South Georgia, near Climax, Georgia. And we would fish at Steinhatchee, not Steinhatchee. You got to get it right. He corrected me on that the first time. So he was always the wagon master, no matter where you went. He would arrange the house. He would arrange the guide, usually a guy named Pat Brook, with whom Jim kept up with many years after he had Pat had retired and moved to Belize. He was that kind of guy. He would tell us where and when we would go to eat, and it was always, the first night was always Roy's, or as you called it, Royd's. And he knew everybody there, and as you know, he was a big tipper. So he said, and also you have to have their corn crab chowder. It is the best in America. So I got some, took home to Lakeland, and later I said, Jim, they charged me $50 for that. He said, don't worry about it. I'll handle it next time. It was $25. He was a great negotiator as well as a great salesman. After that, we would probably go hunting up at Fagan's, and Fagan's place was up in South Georgia. But before we would do that, I want to tell you one story about our fishing. We would always go to Roy's the first day, and the second day would be Fiddler's, because we'd bring our own fish and they would cook it, and Jim would be back there with the cook telling them how to prepare them, what fish goes where. And we could hear music playing in the other room. And it was piano music. And so we ate in one room, and as we left, we went outside, and I said, Jim, he said, you went that way. He said, yeah, I put some money in the tip jar for the piano player. He was on a break, so he didn't see me. I said, Jim, that's a player piano. He said, well, I know it, but the help will split it up. He was a big tipper, I'll tell you. And they loved him for it. At Fagan's house, we always had great shoots, and we had great guides. Jim was always the top gun, of course. And we had a cowboy who is our guide named Dallas Waddell. Could that be a better cowboy name, Dallas Waddell? Anyway, he would have a dinner that Bob would bring the oysters from Tallahassee, and Bill Bill Chase would cook the steaks to perfection, and Dallas would eat with us, and he'd sing to us later and tell us about his drive on a cattle drive, on a cattle trail. But after that, we'd always play gin rummy. And he loved gin rummy as much as he loved hunting. And he was pretty good. One night, in fact, Bill Chase reminded me of this the other day. We had lunch and we were talking about Jim. He said, well, you remember that time that he and I defeated you and Jim Weeks and we blitzed you 3 straight times? And I said, yeah. And you remember what happened at the end of each gin rummy? He said, yeah. Jim would say, Bradley Junction. He didn't ever say gin rummy. He'd say Bradley Junction. And as you know, as you've heard from these guys, he had a word and a name for everything. He would go to the doctor at the Watson Cleaners. When he would go shopping in Weary Haven at Andy Thornall's, he'd go by way of Awfuldale. Or if he were going north and west, he would go to Dead City by way of Suffering Hills. Anyway, he displayed a great sense of humor, and one day he and I and Alec Bryant were having lunch in the yacht club, and Jim said, well, boys, I'm resigning from the yacht club. He said, I've written my letter, and I've told him, I said, I've had a great time. I was Commodore. I got a lot of fun, a lot of memories. He said, but I don't play tennis. I got a swimming pool at my house, and I just sold my yacht. So Jim was such a great salesman that Alec and I got out at the same time. He was a great friend, and he will be truly missed. When my daughter and I spoke and I told him of Jim's passing, she said, Dad, who are you going to do your crossword puzzle review with? And who are you going to speak Japanese with? I said, sayonara, oyasu Jim-san. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Bill McKee. I first got to know Jim and Pat around Christmas time in 1955. I'd married a girl from Winter Haven who was a friend of Pat's that summer prior to my starting in medical school at the University of Virginia. And since that time, we have stayed in contact with Pat and Jim over the next 11 years while I got my education. And after I served in the Air Force in Japan for 3 years. We actually wanted to come back to Lakeland. And while I was in Japan, Pat had heard that Earl Dukes was looking for an ophthalmologist at the clinic, and she put us together with the clinic, and that's how I got to come to the Watson Clinic in Lakeland and for the next 32 years where I practiced, thanks to Pat and Jim. Jim was beautifully described by Andy. I think that's the man he's a man of stature, honesty, and can be trusted with anything. And Jim took me under his wing when I first got here, and he said, McKee, I'm going to see if I can't take a Virginian and turn him into a saltwater fisherman from the 10,000 islands in the Everglades. I said, I'd be happy to do it, see if you can do that. And by the time he was able to organize the trip, he organized one in May of 1967 with Dick Alsop, himself, and me. And we started down and went to Chokoloskee, put the boat in the water, started down the Lopez River. Now, I've heard a lot of things about the Everglades and about fishing, and this was pretty impressive to me. And we started out down the Lopez River, it circles, and you go into Chevrolet Bay, and you look around, and there are no markers. Nothing was marked in the 1960s and 70s down there. You had to know the place by the back of your hand, which Jim did. And we would go into another creek, a little narrow creek, follow it through there, come to a place called Possum Key, where Mr. Darwin, this 90-some-year-old hermit, had lived there for a number of years. It was always part of the deal to stop by, see Mr. Darwin and take a talk with him. And if you give him a six-pack of beer, he'd tell you where the best fishing had been recently, whether it had been or not. And so we left there, we're heading on down, and this was getting interesting because everywhere you went, there were places that went off from here, went off from there, and I had no idea. Now, one thing I have to mention is before we took this trip, Jim had told me, he says, now, Bill, before we go, I want you to go get you a little compass, a little Boy Scout compass, costs about 50 cents. And I want you to pick up this chart. I'm going to give you the chart's name. It's a chart of the area we're going to be in. It's a marine chart. Bring those down. And so, yes, sir. And boy, this sounds pretty interesting. Anyway, we had those, and somewhere along the way, I've never understood exactly where it was. He found a creek to the right. He said he'd never been in. He thought he'd check it out. We went up there about 2/10 of a mile. It opened up into a nice bay that had a stump almost in the middle, but just toward one end with a lot of debris around it. He says, this looks like a good place to troll. And so, we pull out the old Everglades fishing lure, the number 3 Reflecto deal, and that was the lure to use in the Everglades. And we started around that stump. And by George, the first time around, 2 of our lines caught a snook, a really good sized snook. So, well, we said, this looks pretty good. We were going around again. And honest to goodness, you guys, we caught a snook 1 or 2 lines every time we went around. And we were sitting there thinking, boy, we have hit the jackpot. And this was in the spring, and we were fishing, and fishermen sometimes sip on a little white water, brown water, and we'd been doing that for a while. And with the glee of catching these snook, we sipped on a little more. And we had decided that the first person who could catch 20 snook, he would be awarded the Blue Max of snook fishing. At that time, there was a movie called The Blue Max, in which German pilots in World War I, when they shot down 20 enemy planes, they would be awarded the Blue Max. And so that was all the big race. So we were fishing for the Blue Max. And in doing this, we weren't paying much attention to where the sun was going in the sky. And we suddenly realized just before Jim caught the Blue Max fish that the sun had already set. And so he said, we better pull things up here and put the fish on a trailing line. And we started out that creek again. By the time we got halfway through the creek, it was dark. I mean, pitch black. And here's Allsop out front with his flashlight on the way. All of a sudden I hear a scream from Jim. He says, damn it, we just ran over a stump and lost that whole string of fish. And somebody said, we should go back and get him? He says, no, I don't even know exactly where it was. We don't have time. It's getting dark. So we finally got out of that stream, and Jim took over with him, and he turned the boat to the left, and we relaxed and had another sip. And Alsop was in the front. He had to shine the flashlight to keep from running into the sides. And we went to one place for a while, and then another place this direction, and another. And then Jim finally stopped, and he says, guys, I'm not sure where we are. I can't find what I was looking for. Let me tell you, you talk about sobering up in a minute. We're a new guy down in the Everglades at night with no seams and deer fly and what else might be there. I immediately whipped out that little compass and that chart, and I set it down with the compass aligned to the north, where the compass pointed north. That's where the chart was. And I asked Jim, where do you think we are? He said, well, I don't know, I'm somewhere in here. And so I said, all right, let's go this way. We knew that Chokoloskee should be a little bit to the north-northwest. So that's the direction we wanted to go, but when we went that way, we read all south is running to a bank. So we go a little bit to the left and ran to the bank again. Just a little bit further, oh, we found an opening. Then it came back around to the right. And this went on, all south on the bow, shining the light, Jim looking over my shoulder at the map, and where that little needle was pointing. And we bumped into a lot of places, but eventually we found a hole in the general direction we want to go. And after about an hour and a half to 2 hours, we found ourselves in the Lopez River. And boy, if you're in the Lopez River, you know where you are from there, and you can get back. And that's what we did. And that was my first trip. Now, to this day, I do not know if Jim had me get that compass and those charts just to test me out and see how I would react. But if he was just testing me, I sure wish he'd have turned the test off in less than 2 hours. I did want to say that Jim was, as Andy pointed out, one of the strongest guys. When you go to see him, he had flashed a smile on his face that would just lighten the whole room. He was always a friend. He was always willing to help. He was my teacher, my mentor, and he was also throughout my very, very best friend. And Jim will always be the best friend I've ever known, the one I could most depend on.
I've selected a passage of scripture for us to think about for just a few moments from the 21st chapter of the Gospel of John. Simon, called Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We'll go with you." They went out and got into the boat. But that night, they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the beach. He said to them, "Hey, fellas, you caught any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, you'll find some." So they did as Jesus told them, and they weren't able to haul in the quantity of the fish. And the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish. They were not far from land, about 100 yards off. When they got out of the boat on the land, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish frying on it and some bread. Jesus said, "Bring some fish you just caught." So Simon Peter hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many fish, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." I think about how many fishing trips Jim went on. But there's so much about this passage of Scripture that would have been applicable to Jim in his life. First of all, you have to notice that Jesus had nicknames for all the disciples, something we sometimes overlook. Simon was his real name, but Jesus called him Peter, the rock. And there was Thomas that was called the twin. And the sons of Zebedee and Nathaniel, he said, of Cana of Galilee. Gave them names just like Jim. Hey, it was not original with Jim. Jesus did a long time ago. And I think about the names that Jim had too. For instance, he's Frank James Fore Jr., but not very many people called him that. In fact, I suppose if you had called him that, he would look around to see who you were talking about. Maybe his dad was there. But he always went by Jim. But he wasn't Jim to Pat. She called him Honey. Most of the time anyway, right? Sometime it was Mud, but most of the time. Think of that. 69 years, we talked about that. 69 years of marriage, and what a testimony to us and to our children and to our grandchildren of walking together in faith and in fun and in love. But to his children, Scott and Kathy and Andy, he wasn't known as Jim or Mr. Fore or Honey. He was Dad, a title that is precious to have, and a name we shall always love to call. And he was an example we've heard of what a dad should be and what a dad can be. And to his grandchildren, he wasn't any of those names. He was DJ Dush. Did I get it right? Huh? BJ. D is what I said. D is in dog. Daddy Jim is what I was told. And shortened to Dish. So, a special title and a special relationship as well. And to his friends, he was just Jim. A real special person in their lives. Well, the other day, Jesus called his name. He said, "Come on over here with me, Jim. Let's go fishing together." Jesus always had a special relationship with fishermen. 1/3 of the 12 were fishermen. So he said, "Come on over, Jim. We'll go fishing together." Jim isn't gone. Jim isn't died. He's just gone fishing. And one day, we'll see him again. And that's the truth. Amen. Amen. We'll now stand and say together the affirmation of faith. We'll keep standing through the singing of the doxology, which is on the back of your bulletin, and then we'll have the benediction. We believe in the one God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and all that is seen and unseen. We believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, eternally begotten of the Father, God from God, light from light, one God from true God, begotten, not made, of one being with the Father. Through him all things were made. For us men and for our salvation, he came down from heaven by the power of the Holy Spirit. He became with the Virgin Mary and was made man. And for our sake, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He suffered death and was buried. And on the third day, he rose again in accordance with the scriptures. He ascended into heaven, is seated at the right hand of the Father. He will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. And of his kingdom there had been no end. We believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father and the Son. With the Father and the Son is worshiped and glorified. He has spoken through the prophets. We believe in the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. We acknowledge our baptism for the forgiveness of sins. We look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Amen. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here below. Praise him above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Praise God the Father, who's the source. Praise God the Son, who is the course. Praise God the Spirit, who's the flow. Praise God our portion here below. Amen. Again, O Lord, we thank you for the life and the witness of Jim Fore. We commend him to your care and trust that you will receive him unto yourself. And now continue to walk with us, bless us, and comfort us, and never leave us alone. For we really need you, Lord Jesus. And we ask it in the name of Christ, the one who cares about us. Amen. If you would be seated, please. There's the song that was Pat and Jim's together is a special love song that we want to hear at this time.
Oh,
you please remain standing as the family is escorted out? They would love to receive you in the foyer immediately after the service.
Nice job, nice job.